Welcome to this presentation on facilitation strategies to support the delivery of the professional practice seminars. The professional practice seminars are an initiative of the Office of the Manitoba Fairness Commissioner, and they're designed to provide internationally educated professionals, or IEPs, with an introduction to the intercultural skills, the communication skills, and the soft skills that they require for success in their work environment in Canada. So this resource is designed for PPS facilitators. So we're going to begin this presentation on facilitation strategies by considering first your experiences as a learner. So consider a workshop or a course that you've participated in recently, or just your experiences as a learner in general. So first, let's think about what was most helpful for you as a learner. So what are your learning preferences? Do you prefer having opportunities for discussion in a workshop, or having activities to complete with a partner? Or perhaps you prefer more time for independent work and to listening to the presenter in a class? Do you like having resources to follow along with during the class or to review after the class? Let's use those preferences as a starting point. So next, think about what barriers or challenges have you experienced as a learner. So this might include conflicting obligations. So perhaps when you were a learner, you were also an employee or a parent. So you had some different role responsibilities. Maybe you had low energy because you were coming to a class after a long day of work. Perhaps you had insufficient commute time, so you were rushing to the workshop or to the course that you were attending. So think about some of your experiences and what barriers your learners might also experience in their class. So next, consider something you may have needed as a learner that you didn't receive in class. So this might be something physical. So for example, a break during a class, or just an opportunity to get up and stretch. Maybe it was a little bit too sedentary in the class and you need to be moving around to digest some new information. Or this might also apply more directly to the content that you were exposed to in the course or the workshop. So it might be an opportunity to try out, to apply and practice the skills or material that you were learning. So that might be another point that you needed as a learner, but that you didn't receive. So next, think about when your attention and your energy are waning during a presentation or during a course, what do you need? This might be something you did receive during a course, but just think about what is it that you need to re-energize you and refocus you in a class as a learner. So do you need a chance to discuss and to apply your skills, to move around, or just simply to take a break? And finally, think about how your experiences as a learner might have differed from your colleagues or a fellow participant in the course of the workshop. So for example, this might be learning preferences that you considered in response to the first question on this page. So this might help give you a context to thinking about some of the experiences that your participants within the PPS sessions that you facilitate may experience. So with your experiences as an adult learner in mind, let's move forward with this presentation on facilitation strategies. So to give you an overview of this presentation, we're first going to take a look at the principles of adult learning and the principles of EAL pedagogy, both of which we addressed during the introduction to Module 1 of the PPS facilitator training. Then next we'll get into the facilitation strategies themselves. So we'll first look at preparing for each session and starting each PPS class. Next we'll take a look at creating a positive environment and a motivating learning environment. We'll next take a look at comprehensible input. Then effective activities for the professional practice seminars. Then finally, strategies for facilitating meaningful discussion during the professional practice seminars. Then we'll take a look at some strategies for providing and eliciting feedback during the professional practice seminars. And we'll end with putting it into practice, and then you'll have some resources that you can use for moving forward. So we're going to take a look at 4 principles of adult learning. So the first is that adult learning is problem-oriented with a need for immediate application of knowledge. The second is that adults have prior knowledge and experience, which provide valuable learning resources. The third principle is that adults are often independent and self-directed learners who need to understand the relevance of a learning opportunity. And finally, adult learning is enhanced in cooperative learning environments where mutual acceptance and respect are evident. So what do these principles really mean in terms of the practices in our classroom during our facilitation of the PPS? So largely, these principles of adult learning, and we'll see later EAL pedagogy, have really been addressed in the development of resources for this training. So to begin with, addressing the first principle of adult learning. So adult learning is problem-oriented with a need for immediate application of knowledge. So many case studies and situations have been included throughout the PPS modules to really provide a chance for the application of the skills and the content addressed throughout these modules. So these situations are truly problem-oriented, and they require participants to apply their knowledge through discussion of how they would respond to the situations that are presented. So for the second principle, how can we address this principle of adult learning? So adults have prior knowledge and experience which provide valuable learning resources. So as you review the facilitator notes for each module, you'll notice that there are often instructions such as, before you show the next slide, ask participants to brainstorm what they already know about nonverbal communication, for example. So this gives participants an opportunity to access and share their prior knowledge and to make connections between what they already know and newly acquired information shared during the PPS. So for the third principle of adult learning, adults are often independent and self-directed learners who need to understand the relevance of a learning opportunity. So how can we address this principle during the PPS? So first of all, the resources have been developed with the collaboration of language and communication specialists as well as technical professionals from each field. So they've really been explicitly designed to provide learners with relevant learning opportunities and relevant content that they need for success in their field. But an example of how we might extend this principle of self-direction and independent learning is through the KWL activity. And if you'll recall that stands for Know, Want to Know, and Learned. So this gives participants a chance, first of all, to address principle number 2. Adults have prior knowledge and experience which provide valuable learning resources. So they give adults a chance to, first of all, describe what they know about this field. But second of all, it gives participants a chance to direct their learning by indicating what they want to know about this topic. So they can brainstorm questions that they hope to see addressed during that module. Now, if these questions aren't addressed during a class, as they might be outside of the scope of what you can address within one seminar, then you might want to encourage participants to extend their learning outside of the classroom and perhaps conduct an independent research on the topic, which you can then take up during the following seminar. So that will help to address that third principle of adult learning. And to address it further, you might also want to provide participants with resources and links that they can review and practice at home to continue their learning independently. And then the final principle of adult learning that we have here is that adult learning is enhanced in cooperative learning environments where mutual acceptance and respect are evident. So again, the PPS modules have been designed to encourage cooperative learning through the completion of discussions, case studies, and role plays. And we'll also discuss strategies that you can implement in your class that can help to enhance safety and trust and respect in the classroom later on in this presentation. So now we'll move on to the principles of EAL pedagogy. Let's review the principles of EAL pedagogy that we discussed and applied during your PPS facilitator training. So first, the language of instruction is appropriate with limited use of idioms and an avoidance of culturally based illustrations or concepts. Second, the prior knowledge and cross-cultural experiences of learners are valued and respected. Third, knowledge and information is exchanged for mutual benefit without value judgments or ethnocentric overtones, i.e. not right, just different. Let's review the principles of EAL pedagogy that we discussed and applied during your PPS facilitator training. First, the language of instruction is appropriate with limited use of idioms and an avoidance of culturally based illustrations or concepts. Second, prior knowledge and cross-cultural experiences of learners are valued and respected. Third, knowledge and information is exchanged for mutual benefit without value judgments or ethnocentric overtones. And lastly, the communicative approach is used, and that includes a learner-centered approach, task-based instruction, with information introduced being contextualized with real-world descriptions and using examples and role plays. And that also includes the use of interactive activities and visual aids. So what do these principles really mean in terms of the practices in our classrooms during the facilitation of the professional practice seminars? So like with the principles of adult learning, these principles of EAL pedagogy have also been addressed in the development of resources for this training. So for example, resources have been developed using plain language or technical language appropriate to the field. And the use of brainstorming activities provide participants with the opportunity to apply the second principle of EAL pedagogy, which is that prior knowledge is valued and respected. Additionally, in the third and fourth modules of the professional practice seminars, there are many real-world situations and tasks that participants must respond to, which is consistent with the communicative approach. And regarding the importance of visual aids, the PowerPoint presentations will be a really crucial visual aid to support you during your facilitation of the PPS, as will be the participant notes and the worksheets. So you can see that many of these principles of EAL pedagogy and of adult learning have been addressed in the development of these resources, which will really be a support to you. But the use of effective facilitation strategies will further support these principles and will help to create the most effective learning environment for your professional practice seminar participants. So let's discuss those further. So we're going to examine some facilitation strategies that will be effective in supporting your participants within the professional practice seminars. So what we're going to do is walk through these strategies in a linear way. So beginning with what we'll do to prepare for PPS facilitation, how to begin a session, activities that you can use during a session, and then finally how to follow up on each professional practice seminar. So let's begin the examination of facilitation strategies by first considering your experiences and your strengths as a facilitator. So this will help to guide you in terms of what areas of this presentation and which of these resources you might want to focus your professional development on. So take a few minutes to consider your skills relating to each of these points before you move forward. I can confidently prepare for facilitating each professional practice seminar. I know strategies for starting a professional practice seminar effectively. I can facilitate introductions and connections and get to know participants, and I'm familiar with appropriate icebreaker activities. I can create an effective learning environment. I understand how to ensure my input to learners is comprehensible. I'm familiar with a variety of effective learning activities for adult EAL learners, and I can implement them into the professional practice seminars. I can facilitate meaningful discussion, and I can provide participants with relevant and timely feedback, and I can also elicit feedback. So we'll return to this list at the end of this session. So preparing for PPS facilitation. As you know, of course, facilitation doesn't start when participants walk into the room. So what you do to set up for a class is in some ways just as important as what you do when the students arrive. So let's take a look at some strategies for ensuring that we prepare effectively for PPS facilitation. Since the material has already been developed for you, you don't need to worry about designing effective lessons or developing resources that meet the needs of your participants. So where you'll start then is familiarizing yourself with the resources that you have. So you want to ensure you're familiar with all the resources to be utilized each session. So that includes reviewing your notes and using the PPS facilitator training videos that are available as necessary. So make copies as you need to and organize your resources, and then take some time to budget at the time of each session. If you're off of your plan or how you're planning on budgeting your time, that's okay. You just might want to consider a backup plan for what to do if you're behind, so if it's taking you longer to get through activities than you had planned, or if you're too fast. However, there's a lot of material in each module. So if you're realizing after the first module that you went through it rather quickly, you might be glossing over the material that you provide, and you might not be giving participants an appropriate chance to digest the material and apply as you go through the content. The next strategy for preparing for PPS facilitation is to ensure you familiarize yourself with the objectives for each module. An optional strategy is that you can write these objectives on the board and review them at the outset of each seminar with your participants so that they're aware of what they will accomplish, and it helps to keep you on track as well. You can also use this strategy with your agenda for the class. So you can write your agenda on the board, even including your budget in terms of how much time you'll use for each topic. And again, go over that at the beginning of the class with your participants, and that can help you keep you on track, and it allows participants to know where a session is heading as well. So the next strategy is to arrive early. It's really important not to underestimate the time that you need to set up your facilitation space, and also number 4, to set up your materials, the technology that you have, and to get all the resources and your room in working order before the session starts. So in terms of this point, setting up the room, you may also want to consider what the most effective way to set up the room would be. So there's a lot of pair work and group work built into these activities, as you know. So grouping tables together might be a really helpful way to facilitate discussion and collaboration during each PPS seminar. So here's an example of strategies number 1 and 2 from the previous slide on preparing for PPS facilitation. So on the left, you'll see an example of writing the objectives on the board. So here are the objectives for Module 1 of the PPS. So if you go over these at the beginning of class with participants, then they'll get a sense of what they will be able to do by the end of the seminar. Then as you progress through the seminar, you can even check off the objectives as you complete them, and that might help keep you on track. And on the right, there's an example of the agenda written on the board. Again, this is for Module 1. So you can even add in the time if you'd like, which might help keep you on track and keep your participants on track. And again, give them an understanding of what to expect in the session and where the session is headed. And then again, as you progress through the seminar, you can check off your agenda items as you complete them. So this is just an optional strategy. You might have another strategy that works more effectively for your class, and by all means, be sure to implement that within your PPS sessions. The next facilitation strategy that we'll take a look at relates to how you begin each session. So what are some strategies to keep in mind in order to begin each session effectively? So your first opportunity to make an impression on your participants is at the first session as they arrive. So as participants arrive to this initial session, try to take an opportunity to connect with participants individually. You can do this by introducing yourself, and asking their name, their professional background, and be sure to smile and welcome them to the session. And this will likely help put your participants at ease. This may seem obvious right now, but once we're in facilitation mode, we may become very focused on the presentation we're about to deliver, rather than on greeting participants and making those initial connections. And you might also want to think back to your own experiences as a learner. So what do you expect from the facilitator or teacher, and what helps to make you feel more at ease at that first session? Additionally, you might want to ask participants to sign in and take a name card or make a name tag. And this will be a helpful resource if you struggle with learning names in particular. And even if you do struggle with this skill, I think it's really important not to use that as an excuse for not learning the names of your participants. So I think calling students by name really communicates respect. It helps to make participants feel recognized in the class. It gives you a really easy way to connect with participants and to draw them out, and also to show them that you're interested. But if you do need that extra help, make name tags for participants for each session, or just have them write their first names on a tinted index card to keep on their desktop, and that will probably help prompt you. Then at future sessions, as participants arrive, again, be sure to greet them by name and try to connect with them by asking them a question. You might even try to facilitate connections by students. And we can also accomplish this through icebreaker activities, which we'll take a look at shortly. Then finally, try to establish a routine for each session. Your routine will likely begin with starting each professional practice seminar on time, and then find a flow that works for you. So for example, your flow could begin with welcoming participants, reviewing the previous professional practice seminar quickly. You might want to involve participants right away by having them brainstorm on what they remember from the previous professional practice seminar. And this is often prompted even in the PPS content. So that will be a helpful resource as well. And then ask if there are any questions that have come up since the previous seminar that you delivered. And then you might want to review the objectives or the agenda for the current professional practice seminar. And if you've used the strategy of writing your objectives or your agenda on the board, this will be easy to refer to. And then you'll be able to begin the content for the professional practice seminar module. Next, we'll get into the real bulk of facilitating a PPS session. And we'll consider the topic of creating a positive and motivating learning environment for your participants. So again, let's start with your own experiences as a foundation and think about these questions. So first, what factors really increase your comfort in a classroom, both physically and mentally? If that's a workshop, a one-day thing, or if it's an ongoing class. Next, when you participate in a course or in a workshop, what help makes you feel safe to take risks and ask questions in a class? And finally, what keeps you engaged and motivated throughout the class? So like you, your professional practice seminar participants may be coming to the class after a long week of work and studying, so they might need the support of the facilitator to help them stay engaged throughout the class, even if the content is really relevant to their work and their development as a professional. So think about what helps to keep you motivated and what engages you throughout a class. Is it taking a short break? Is it getting up and having an opportunity to stretch? Is it interacting and discussing with other participants? Or maybe it's listening to a clear and comprehensible facilitator on a topic that's immediately relevant to you. So engagement and motivation will help to increase the retention of the concepts that you discuss throughout the professional practice seminar. So this is really an important point to reflect on as a facilitator. So with your experiences in mind, let's talk about some strategies now. So I think it's important to note that a positive learning environment really doesn't happen by accident. It's the direct result of the actions that the instructor or facilitator takes. So some of the key components of a positive learning environment might include comfort, respect, trust and safety, open communication, the engagement of your learners, and the opportunity to share learning experiences. So we'll look at each of these in greater detail in the next two slides. So first of all, how can we enhance the physical comfort of our participants? This is sort of an easy starting place. So we might be limited by the characteristics of the location that we have available or the budget available to us, but some simple strategies that might enhance the physical comfort of our participants could include a comfortable desk arrangement that supports the objectives and approach we're using in class. So like we mentioned, there's a lot of group work and pair work involved in this class and the professional practice seminars. So having desks arranged in groups will facilitate that. Also, encouraging students to bring their snacks and to get up as they need will also help. And allowing for a break for stretching and refreshments will also enhance the physical comfort of your participants. Once we have that sort of basic need taken care of, the next step, I think, is encouraging open communication during each professional practice seminar. So that's another way to create a positive and motivating learning environment for your participants. So open communication, how do we enhance that? Building connections with students and between students is really an important way to facilitate this. So one great way to support this is through icebreaker activities. That might happen at the beginning of the very first PPS session, or maybe just for a few minutes at the beginning of each session. So we'll talk about some examples of icebreaker activities in a later slide. The next point is limiting teacher talk time. So that's another important strategy. As we mentioned earlier in this presentation, one key feature of EAL pedagogy that we're encouraging in the professional practice seminar delivery is the use of the communicative approach. And like the name suggests, that means encouraging communication in our participants, and which also means limiting how much we as facilitators talk. So although there's a lot of content that needs to be delivered, that we're not disputing that whatsoever, there are opportunities for participants to share their experiences, and we can encourage this in our professional practice seminars, and also to encourage discussion and debriefing of the content addressed. So those are really important pieces of encouraging open communication. And open communication, as well as respect for our learners, can be shared and enhanced through acknowledging the prior learning experiences of your participants. So one easy way to do this is by asking participants what they already know about a topic before you launch into your presentation. So we can accomplish this through organized brainstorm activities such as the KWL, which was introduced in your PPS facilitator training. And the KWL stands for know, want to know, and learned. So asking participants, what do you already know about this topic? What do you want to know? And finally, what have you learned following the presentation itself? So this could also be accomplished in a less organized way, such as general brainstorming prior to facilitation on a particular topic. And finally, open-ended communication can be enhanced with asking open-ended questions. That involves questions with who, what, where, when, why, and how. And also giving participants time to think and discuss and respond rather than responding to your own questions. So these strategies will really help facilitate open communication. So next, a positive and motivating learning environment also requires safety and trust in the classroom. So we want participants to feel comfortable to share their experiences and to ask questions. So how do we activate this kind of environment? Well, safety and trust can be enhanced through open communication. So using the strategies we discussed in the previous slide will really support this objective. Also, how we respond to participants' questions and responses is also important. We'll look at some really specific examples of language that you can use as a facilitator later in this presentation in the section on facilitating meaningful discussion. So that might be a piece to really hone in on if you think this is an area where you might struggle. Safety and trust can also be enhanced by connecting individually with students and really taking a genuine interest in their situation. Now, lastly, a positive and motivating learning environment requires the engagement and motivation of participants. So if we're able to tap into the first three methods here for creating a positive and motivating learning environment, participants will become more engaged and motivated. But we can also do this by making sure we're explicitly trying to involve students. So the mentality of being a guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage might sort of help to bring this about. Also, using a variety of activities and different grouping arrangements in the classroom might also help to keep students engaged throughout the class. Variety will certainly help. And then finally, ask participants questions and ask them to share their experiences and ideas. Now, you might have a lot of other ideas about how to create a positive and motivating learning environment, and by all means, test those out in your PPS sessions. So as I mentioned, icebreaker activities will help participants to form connections with one another, and that will really enhance open communication, safety and trust in the classroom, and likely engagement and motivation as well. So these are a great way to help participants to get to know one another and even just to warm up at the beginning of a session. So there were 2 suggestions of icebreaker activities in your facilitator notes for Module 1. So the first one involved participants asking participants 10 questions in 30 seconds. So as the instructions stated, you can ask these questions to the entire group, and participants can answer them simply by raising their hands. So since it's a whole class activity, participants can complete it simultaneously, so it's really non-threatening. And then the other icebreaker activity that was introduced in the facilitator notes for Module 1 involved participants introducing themselves just simply using guided questions that you can write on the board. So these 2 activities are really clearly explained in the facilitator notes, so you might want to refer back to those if you need more detail. Another idea is having participants interview a partner, for example, using those same guided questions, and then you could have partners introduce each other to the rest of the class or to a smaller group. Another icebreaker activity is called Find Someone Who, or People Bingo. And in this activity, participants are given a grid, like the one shown on the bottom right-hand side of the slide. And in each of those boxes, it contains a descriptor. So this could be works in a hospital or has been in Canada for more than 12 months. And participants need to ask questions of their co-participants to find someone who matches the characteristics of each box. So this gives them a chance to learn one another's names and also to learn a little bit about each other and hopefully, find some connections with their classmates. And the last example I have listed on here is the commonalities grid. So here's an example of the commonalities grid. So this activity can give participants an organized way to get to know one another. So how it works is in small groups, participants will make a grid like the one that you see on this page with their names on the row at the top and then the first column on the left side. What they'll do is they'll work to identify commonalities. So where their names intersect, they'll discuss what they might have in common. So for example, just from looking at this grid, you can see that Jihuan and Maria both work in a hospital, and Jihuan and Samson both studied English at Red River College. So this is a great way to help participants to get to know one another and to get comfortable at the beginning of a class.
So the idea of comprehensible input as a facilitator is an important component of effective EAL pedagogy. So input, or the language you use in the classroom as the facilitator, is comprehensible if participants can use their prior knowledge, the visual supports available, or the context to infer the meaning of the language. So you can increase the comprehensibility of your sessions if you're aware of how you use language as a facilitator and if you provide additional supports for comprehension. So how can we increase the comprehensibility of our language in the classroom? So in the next 2 slides, we're going to take a look at some strategies that can help us to support comprehensible instruction. So first, ensure that you speak slowly and clearly in your facilitation. So many of us have a tendency to speed up if we're a little nervous, so this is a really particularly important strategy to note. And in order to help slow down your overall pace, try to also pause at key moments to give participants an opportunity to think and digest. So this might be after presenting each point, at the end of each slide. So this will help support students to comprehend your instructions. So the next strategy is to use nonverbal communication to support participants' comprehension. So this could include simple actions like pointing to the board or the slide to support what you're saying, or holding up the handout you're referring to, or using miming or other cues when possible. So these are some strategies that will help to support the comprehensibility of your input. So along with this is to use visuals to support your message. So in this case, two important visual supports that you have available to you are the slides and the handouts. So those will really be a great resource in the classroom that you can take advantage of. And next, it's important to check for comprehension of your participants. So make sure that they are following along with you and that they understand. So instead of asking participants simply, do you understand, as most will simply respond with a yes or a nod, try instead some questions that can elicit their own interpretation of what you've discussed. So for example, the expression, can you think of a situation where you, to get them to draw on their own experiences and make connections with the concept you've just described? Or what is an example of? So if they can provide an example of what you've described, then you know that they understand what you've just described. Another strategy that's not an oral strategy, and it could be used either before the break or at the end of a class, is to give them a post-it note and ask them to write down 2 things that they've learned about this topic and a question that they still have. So this will help to help you to understand what your class is picking up on, and also give participants a chance to have their questions addressed. So the next strategy to increase the comprehensibility of your instruction is to concentrate on the language that you're using. So we want to make sure that the language is appropriate for your participants. So one aspect of this is avoiding idioms and figurative language. Or if you do use idioms, especially idioms that are necessary that they might encounter in their workplace, then just to explain them. So for example, instead of saying, Simon, why don't you take a stab at it? Instead, a simpler request might be, Simon, what do you think? Or do you think you could answer this? Or Clara, can you run that by me again? So instead of using an idiom, run that by me, just to use the literal phrase instead. So Clara, can you repeat that please? If you do think that the idiom is useful and it's something they might encounter in the workplace, then by all means use it. But make sure that it's clear to participants and that you explain it. So for example, if you ask your class, are we all on the same page here? So this might be an idiom that they encounter in the workplace. So use it, but perhaps write it on the board, explain the meaning, and give participants a chance to use this. So state the literal meaning, so we both have the same understanding, to be on the same page. So you won't, by all means, you won't be able to do this with all of the language you use, but it's something to start to be aware of when you're presenting. So another aspect of using appropriate language is avoiding culturally based illustrations or terms, or if you do use them, to explain if you think that they're necessary. So some culturally based references that you might use a lot would be like sports references. So this might not be something that's so useful right at the beginning. But for example, what about the phrase, if you're telling your participants before their break, everyone, if you go on a Timmy's run during your break, just make sure you're not late to return. So Timmy's run, this involves a sort of culturally based reference. But in this case, they might hear this in their workplace. So it might be important to really explain what this means, that it's an abbreviation for Tim Hortons, and that actually typically just means a trip to get a coffee or a snack, and because it might be something they hear in the workplace, so it's sort of important for you to help clarify. So moving on from appropriate use of language, although that's a really key one that'll take a long time to really practice. But another strategy to support the comprehensibility of your instruction is allowing for sufficient wait time after asking questions. So related to the pausing at key moments, the wait time is really the amount of time that you wait after asking a question to your participants. So sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to have silence in the classroom, so we have a tendency to want to fill it, and we would do this by answering our own question. But again, this increases the teacher talk time, and it decreases the interaction and engagement of your students. So, I mean, just think, if you knew that your instructor was going to answer her own questions, how would that sort of change your engagement during class? So when you're facilitating, just try observing yourself if you can. Or if you have a peer who's in the class with you, ask them to observe for this. So count in your head when you ask a question to your participants and see how much time you give them. So research suggests that teachers actually only wait an average of 1.5 seconds in the classroom after asking a question before they answer it themselves. And so increasing that to even 5 or 7 seconds might make a really big difference, especially given that your participants will be predominantly non-native English speakers. So the next strategy is to change the pace and the mode of input. So listening with retention really only lasts about 20 minutes at a time for native speakers. So intersperse your presentation with discussion and other activities like what's been provided to you. So the last aspect of comprehensible instruction that we'll take a look at relates to the instructions that you give your students. So you'll have to give a lot of instructions during your professional practice facilitation, as there's a lot of activities and worksheets to complete. So it's really important that your instructions are clear. So the first thing to think about is making sure your instructions include the why. So why are you doing that activity? Who is doing it, or who are you doing it with? What is the activity? How do you do it? And how long that you have to complete it. And then you can also follow these steps when giving your instructions. And I would even suggest with native English speakers this is useful. So first of all, say the instructions. Then next, write them on the board, or you might have them already embedded into your PowerPoint presentation. Then next, so refer to them and repeat those instructions. Then you can model, if it's a task that you're asking participants to complete, or model the task or give an example, either yourself or elicit an example from your participants. Then you can check for comprehension with your participants, perhaps by eliciting an example. And then finally, clarify if there are any questions.
So now that we've looked at how to prepare for each session, how to start the session, strategies for creating a positive and motivating learning environment, and finally strategies for increasing the comprehensibility of your input, we're going to move on to the topic of effective activities that you can implement in the professional practice seminars. So there's 5 activity types that we're going to look at, and all of these have been integrated into your professional practice seminar resources already. So the 5 we'll take a look at are first the KWL brainstorming strategy. Second is think, pair, share. Then the think aloud. Then we'll take a look at case studies and role plays. So we'll look at what their utility is in the professional practice seminars and also how to facilitate these kinds of activities. So the first activity we'll look at here is the KWL, and that stands for know, want to know, and learned. And an example of this activity is included at the beginning of your Module 1 facilitator notes. So what's the process for this activity? So first of all, you'll need to present a topic or a question to participants. So for example, what are the different forms of nonverbal communication and why is nonverbal communication important? So you could split that up or present it as a question together. And so first, participants, either individually or in partners or in small groups, participants can brainstorm what they already know about this topic. So this gives them an opportunity to access that prior knowledge that they already have. So you can support them by giving them prompts to activate their prior knowledge, and you may want to note participants' responses or have them note their responses on the board in the know column, the K column. So the next step after they brainstorm what they know is to think about what they want to know about this topic. So that's the middle column, the W. So what questions do they have about the importance of nonverbal communication? And then finally, the last step comes after you've presented on this topic. So after you've gone through the content. So after that stage, then students can return to this grid and they can take a look at, take a look at the W column. What do they want to know? And think, well, what did they actually address out of those questions? So they can sort of check off the questions that were addressed and then note any new concepts that they learned. So this gives them a chance to sort of summarize the learning that they've just gone through in that session. And then if there's any of the want to know questions that weren't addressed, you can take some time to answer them at that point. So the next activity is called a think, pair, share. And this really just gives you sort of an organized framework to approach individual, pair, and group brainstorming. So the way that it works is, again, you present a topic or a question to participants. So think again, what are the 6 forms of nonverbal communication? So for the think stage, that first stage, participants get a chance to think about their responses individually. And I like to ask participants to note their responses on a piece of paper. So this stage gives all the participants a chance to activate what they know individually and to ensure that they're all involved in this process. Because sometimes during group work, as you know, some participants might be a lot more involved and some might be less involved. So once that stage is done, I mean, you can give them a set amount of time for this stage. The next is the pair. So with a partner then, they can share the responses that they came up with and see what did they have in common, and then what, in this case, what forms of nonverbal communication can they add to their list that their partner had come up with. And then for that last step, the share, participants can share their responses with the class. And the facilitator or even another participant in the class, you can call someone up, can note their responses on the board. So yeah, like I said, I think this strategy really encourages the involvement of all participants because they're all somewhat more accountable because of that first stage. So I think that can be a useful tool to use in your class. So the next activity type is the think aloud. And what the think aloud means is that it gives you a chance or a participant a chance to orally explain their thought process in a particular situation. And so this can give a practical demonstration of the application of a process to solving a problem. So how it works is you present a challenge or a problem or a question to the class. And it works better if it's probably a situational problem rather than a brainstorming question like the one listed above, the forms of nonverbal communication. So if you're presenting them with a situation, for example, a situation that you're going to ask them to apply the RILC model to, then what you can do for the think aloud is to model your own thought process for solving the problem. So you're literally thinking aloud, you're verbalizing your thoughts. And so you're applying the framework or the method that you've shared in class to that particular problem and modeling how you are suggesting that students approach that process. And then you can ask students to complete that same process in a future situation. So verbalize their thought process behind how they're going to approach that situation, either with a partner that might be less threatening, or if you have a class that's comfortable with one another in a small group or with the whole class. So the next activity is a case study or a situation, which might be a briefer version of a case study. So the case study or the situation should present students with a situation that they can relate to, either from their own life experience or something that they might encounter in the future, such as in the workplace. So it should provide some realistic information, and that gives a chance to sort of contextualize some of the content that you've addressed in class. And it typically has a conflict that students can resolve. So you have a lot of examples of great case studies and situations within your PPS resources that you can draw from during your PPS facilitation. So the procedure for facilitating a case study or a situation is, first of all, to give them some input. So you need to provide students with a focus or a framework that they'll later use when they're analyzing the situation. So this is typically how it's presented in your PPS facilitator notes. You have an opportunity to teach some content. Let's go back to the RILC model. So the RILC model, you have an opportunity to explain that model and how it can be used in solving a problem in the workplace. And then you give students that situation. You give students an example, and with the intent that they will be able to use that framework, that RILC model, to apply it and solve that situation. So this can involve you giving students some time to analyze that situation individually or in groups, and you might want to ask them to write down their analysis as well. Then if you have time available, you certainly don't always need to do this, but especially for the first example or situation in a worksheet, you might want to take a chance to discuss it as a larger group to get a sense of what all of your students' analyses of those situations were, how they might approach resolving that, and sort of draw out some of those main ideas. So you're ensuring that everyone is on the same page. And then once that analysis has been completed, once they've completed their application of that model to the situation, then you can go back to the content you've been discussing to really illustrate how that situation illustrates some of the concepts that you've been addressing within that course material. So how does it illustrate that need for using direct or assertive language, for example, if you've just been talking about that? So the final activity we'll take a look at is the role play. So the role play is similar to the case study or situation, but in the role play, you're asking participants to bring to life that situation and apply some of the new knowledge that they've just gained to that situation. So typically it involves a situation or case study to set up the role play, and then the participants enact that situation, and that's sort of the basis for further discussion. So they're used to give students a chance to experiment with different styles of interaction and to practice new communication techniques and explore some of the complex issues you'll be addressing in the PPS. And it gives them a safe environment in which to test it and to receive feedback. So just a note, if you haven't participated in a role play, then it might be a good idea to try it out before you participate or before you lead a role play within your class. So what is the process then for going through a role play with your class? So first of all, like with all activities, I think the why is a key part. So explain why you're using the role play. Make sure you get that buy-in first. Explain what that role play will offer participants, because participants might be a little bit more reticent to involve themselves in the role play. It might be a little bit scarier than simply discussing the issue. And then you'll want to describe the context of that role play. So provide them with the situation. Next, you'll have to assign the specific roles to those individuals within that situation. So this might either be on the form of a role card or from that situation itself, if you've projected it onto the board in your PowerPoint presentation, then you can simply assign those roles. So for example, patient and healthcare professional, or client and technician. So you'll want to make sure that that individual is clear about who it is that they're role playing and what that individual's concerns are. And then give participants a few minutes just to prepare for their roles and refer back in their notes to the language or the concepts that you're hoping that they'll apply in this role play. And then you can begin the role play and give them a set number of minutes to complete that situation. And once it's finished, a really important piece of this is debriefing and discussing the role play. So ask participants to share what were their experiences with using that language. What did they find difficult? What did they notice in their partner's language? What did they notice that their partner was doing that might be helpful for that individual to know? And then what are those connections to the course material that you've been discussing? So as you go through this discussion, just important to pay attention as you go through to any points that need clarification or any issues that arose during this, and you can address those following that role play. So let's wrap up this topic on effective activities for the PPS with looking at some general strategies for facilitating effective activities. So first of all, it's important to explain the objective of the activity. So that's the why. Why are we doing this activity? Next, making sure you're giving your participants clear instructions using the strategies we discussed earlier. Then this may involve modeling the activity and checking for comprehension with your participants. Then it's important to allow sufficient time to complete the activity. So if you don't have enough time, then think about how you can modify the activity. So on some of the worksheets that you might have in your PPS resources, there might be 4 situations for participants to look at. Instead, you might ask them to take a look at only 2 or assign 1 to each pair. So that way they're able to have the sufficient time that they need to really look at that activity in depth. Then during the activity, what is it that you should be doing? So while the activity is going on, it's important to circulate around the room and listen to participants and be available to them if they have any questions. This might be a time where participants feel a little bit more comfortable with asking you a question if they don't understand. So make sure you're available to respond to their questions, and as you're listening to participants, note any common errors that you might hear that you might want to share with the group after the fact, sort of anonymously. Just explain, oh, I heard this from a few groups, and I just want to explore that with all of you. So then after the activity, follow up by maybe you might want to ask groups to share some of their responses or to share a challenge that they encountered in completing the activity, and go through any common concerns and how you might resolve those with the group. And then an optional extension, the PPS doesn't explicitly involve homework, but you might want to encourage participants to get some additional practice time by practicing some of these strategies at home. And this can be a good way to extend and further develop their skills. So the last activity type that we'll look at is discussions. So there's a lot of opportunities for the integration of discussions into the professional practice seminars, but how do we really facilitate meaningful discussions during these classes? So here are some strategies that we can use to help us with that process. And you'll see a lot of parallels between these strategies and some of the other suggestions that we've already discussed. So first of all, creating a comfortable and non-threatening environment will really help to create a foundation for the meaningful discussions that can come later. When you're embarking on the discussion itself, make sure the objective of the discussion is clear for participants, that they really understand what the question is. And you can provide clarification on that and a structure for the discussion by writing the topic or the questions on the board that will help guide that discussion. Next, like we mentioned, it's important not to answer your own questions. So first, give participants time to think. So integrating an activity like the Think, Pair, Share might give you the structure you need to take that step back to begin and allow participants the chance for independent thought on the topic, sharing with a partner, before you do some sharing with a larger class. The next point is showing respect for all questions and comments. It can sometimes be difficult to know how to respond on the spot to a participant if they have a comment that might be a little bit off target. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at some sample responses to participants for issues such as that when a response is off target, and how to also encourage participants with both our verbal and nonverbal cues. The next point is asking the participants or the contributors for further clarification and elaboration when necessary. So ask them to dig a little bit deeper when they respond. And you can do this by asking follow-up questions, or you might need to paraphrase their comments if that's necessary. In some cases, you might also want to write participants' comments on the board if it's something you might come back to later. So in the topic we've brought up on a few occasions about the forms of nonverbal communication, you might want to write those on the board to then compare what they were able to come up with the forms of nonverbal communication that we'll take a look at during the PPS. So the next strategy is trying to create a balance within your classroom to help control or support that group dynamic, and giving a chance for all members of the group to speak. So you might notice in your PPS facilitation that there's some members of the group who are a lot more willing to jump in and share their contributions, but you might want to give all the members of the group of your group a chance to speak. If a participant asks a question and you're not sure of the answer, it's really important not to be afraid to admit that you don't know, rather than trying to invent a response. So one way to deal with it is saying, "Oh, what a good question! Why don't we look into that, both of us, for homework?" The next strategy is not to be afraid to admit that you don't know. So if a participant asks a question and you're not sure of the answer, then you can simply tell them exactly that. That's a great question. You know what? I'm not sure. Why don't we each do some homework between now and our next professional practice seminar and look into this, and we'll share our responses at that time. We'll share, what we've found at that time. So that can be a good way to address a question where you're not sure of what the answer is. And then the final point here is revisiting sort of past contributions and past discussions and incorporating them into subsequent discussions. So you might see that a participant's responses in one discussion don't really fit there, but they might apply later on. So you can help validate their contributions in that later discussion by saying, "Oh, Ji-Hwan, do you remember when you were responding about this to the topic of forms of nonverbal communication? Well, your response actually fits in a lot more effectively here." And that can help to create that cohesiveness in the class, that continuity of your material, and to help validate the responses of the participants. And then after the discussion, make sure that you're connecting participants' comments and responses to the session content. So making those linkages really clear. So the final component about facilitating meaningful discussions is how we respond to our participants. And the way we respond is really crucial in guiding and supporting that discussion. So to start out with, a lot of the language we'll use is encouraging, like great idea or interesting point, let me write that down. And that's a little bit easier to navigate. But what about how we respond to participants when their answer might be unclear or it might be a little bit off target? So if you need participants to clarify their responses or expand upon them, you could ask them things like, what do you mean by? Or can you give me an example of this? What are your reasons for saying this? Can you be more specific? Or could you explain your answer further? If you want to support them by providing a paraphrase or to help guide them back on target, then you might want to say something like, let me see if I understand you. Do you mean? And then paraphrase their response. Another alternative is, that's an interesting point. I'll write it down and we'll return to it when I show you the answers. So that might be a strategy to use if the answer is a little bit off target, because then you can compare it at that time. And then finally, if a participant gives an answer or question that's really off topic or it doesn't relate to what you're working on at the moment, rather than changing the focus for everyone, what you could say is something like, that's a great question, but it doesn't exactly relate to this topic. Could you write it down and then we can discuss it at break? And that way you're able to address that individual's questions, but it doesn't compromise your ability to make it through the content in that module. So this is just a small selection of sample responses to participants, and there's a much larger repository of comments that are included at the link that's provided at the bottom of this slide. So the final aspect of facilitation that we're going to take a look at in this presentation is the topic of feedback, more specifically on providing feedback and eliciting feedback. So the material that's provided on this slide is actually drawn from Module 3 in the Professional Practice Seminars. So it might seem familiar to you because you've delivered on this exact topic to your internationally educated professional audience. So it's not only is it relevant to that group, it's also really relevant to us as professionals and as facilitators. So as we discussed in that module, what's the objective of providing and receiving feedback? Well, again, as we discussed in Module 3, the purpose of providing and receiving feedback is to provide or obtain information about the level of performance, and also, in our case, to assist participants in achieving their learning goals. So we'll want to elicit feedback both on our facilitation approach, so the strategies we use, as well as on participants' comprehension of the content. So there's many other objectives of providing and eliciting feedback as well. Feedback also reinforces strengths. It might raise awareness to areas that need continued development, and that will increase the recipient's abilities to identify and address their errors independently in the future. Providing feedback and eliciting feedback in a classroom environment really gives an opportunity to learn from and correct those issues in a really safe learning environment. So it's a really valuable tool for self-improvement. And I think that the 360-degree feedback system, where you're both providing feedback and eliciting feedback on your own performance, it might encourage more trust and respect and receptivity to the feedback within your classroom. So as we discussed in Module 3, there are two different types of feedback. So the first one is supportive feedback. And that's information about what you or what your participants are doing right and why it's right. And the second one is corrective feedback. That's information about what you or your participants are doing wrong and how it can be corrected. So we really want to try and strike a balance between these two types of feedback in our class and make sure the feedback we're providing is really constructive. So how do we provide our participants with effective feedback? So keep in mind that effective feedback is collaborative and it's clear. So it's based on direct observations, and they're focused on specific behaviors that can be changed. And that includes examples to illustrate the points that you make. So with that in mind, let's look at some strategies for giving feedback. So again, when you're giving feedback, concentrate on the behavior or the language that needs to be changed and use specific examples. So avoid sort of general comments that won't be very useful to the receiver. So if you can include a specific example to illustrate your statement and provide that individual with alternatives rather than just advice, that will really be more beneficial to that individual. And the next one is balance the content by addressing strengths and areas that require improvement when you're providing the recipient with feedback. So that means include some of that supportive feedback, but also the corrective feedback to provide that balance. Next, be realistic. So we should really be focusing on what can be changed. Next, be timely. So we need to find an appropriate time to communicate that feedback. So being prompt is important because feedback will really lose its impact if it's delayed too long. But you might also want to find a more private time to share that feedback if it's personal, such as at a break or after class. That might be a more appropriate time rather than immediately when the issue arose. And then finally, offer a sort of continued support. So feedback is a continuous process, and it's not a one-time event. So let the recipients know that you're available if they have questions, and if it's appropriate, you can let them know that you're willing to provide more feedback in the future about the same concern. So finally, how do we elicit feedback on our own behaviors? So that'll likely be on our own facilitation strategies. So we'll need to create opportunities to elicit and receive feedback from our participants. So we can really do this by incorporating eliciting feedback into our class routine. So it's really perceived as a regular part of the class, either by incorporating a feedback related task at the end of each session or after each session. So how can we elicit this feedback? So here are four formal and informal ideas for doing this. So first of all, the post-it note. So using a post-it note is an easy way to elicit feedback that can be anonymous either at a break or at the end of the class. So you can ask participants either a general or a particular question, and they can anonymously respond. So for example, you might want to ask them, what was most useful about this session? Or what do you wish could change, or what change do you wish could be made for the next professional practice seminar? So they can just jot down their response. So this might be about the content itself, it might be about the facilitation strategies that were used, and so this will be really helpful to implement into your next professional practice seminar delivery. So the next idea is the 3-2-1. So this will take a little bit longer, maybe about 5 minutes, and likely will be done at the end of the class. And it will give you feedback on your facilitation strategies as well as on the comprehension of participants on that content. So what you do is you ask participants 3 different questions. So for the first question, they need to provide you with 3 answers. For the second question, 2 answers. And for the third, 1 answer. So for example, number 1, what were the 3 most important things you learned today? Number 2, what 2 questions do you still have? Number 3, what would you like to see done differently at the next session? So those approaches are more informal and can be done pretty quickly in your class. But you might also want to incorporate an opportunity for feedback that participants can complete at home between sessions, such as an online survey to provide feedback. So there's 2 programs that are free for this are SurveyMonkey or Fluid Survey. And an online survey may be a little bit more informal, or it might be formal with a variety of questions on particular facilitation or content areas. So this is the last idea then, a formal feedback form, which will provide you with some summative information about the course delivery. So this will come less frequently than the first 2 strategies. So it might be at the end of a final session, might be the most appropriate time. So on the formal feedback form, you can include targeted questions about different areas of your practice to get specific feedback that you can then incorporate into future professional practice seminar deliveries. And then what do you do with the feedback once you receive it? Well, first of all, it's really important to listen to the feedback given or receive it if you're reading. Then to understand that message before you respond to it. Then finally reflect and decide what to do before you follow up. And you might follow up by changing your own behaviors or addressing it in another way. So now we'll return to the self-assessment tool that we used at the very beginning of this presentation. So take a few minutes to review this tool again and consider if your knowledge relating to each of these points has changed. And if you see that there's an area where you still need more support, then accompanying this presentation is a list of resources. And these resources are organized around these categories. So I'd encourage you to consult the resources I've included for some further reading and reference as you need in your professional practice seminar delivery. So thank you so much for your hard work as professional practice seminar facilitators. You really play an important role in the journeys of internationally educated professionals in Manitoba. So good luck on your own professional practice seminar facilitation journeys.